Hey everyone, my name's Lily and I'm the book blogger behind Utopia State of Mind, and I'm going to share with you my April wrap-up. I'm filming this on the last day of April, but I pushed really hard to finish all the books that I was going to finish in April yesterday, and also to write all the reviews for April yesterday, which, that's the difficult part. So I just want to start off by doing kind of like an overview of April at the beginning. April, I read 34 books, which I know that in my March wrap-up, I was like, I don't want to read as many books. Okay, I didn't want to read as many books. Here's my defense and my rebuttal, okay? My defense is that the things that I was like, the life events in my life that I knew that were going to come up, ended up being pushed, I guess, like to May. So I had more time in April than I thought to kind of get ready and churn out all these reviews and these videos and just, pictures and everything like that. So this was kind of, the end of April was my finish line essentially for all of that. And so I was like, gotta keep going. My rebuttal is that even though I read a large amount of books this month, I don't feel as wiped out as I was expecting to, right? So I felt super wiped out, today and yesterday, because as I said, I was pushing to write the reviews so I could film today. But I don't feel as wiped out, for example, as I was last month. And I think it's because I was also just trying to take a better outlook on my reading this month. And I don't think I was entirely successful. But I do think that I was one small step for Lily, one big step for how I see arcs, I guess. And just, taking time off for the day, or, taking just a little bit less pressure or more pressure off of myself. And with actual terms of numbers, you can see that it wasn't as, as successful as I wanted it to be. But in terms of mental state, I feel a lot better now than I do, for example, at the end of March. And so I hope that I'm on the step, like on the way. I think I felt better mentally, and I felt like, okay, I can stop reading. But then a lot of days, if I had spare time, I was like, well, I could keep reading if I wanted to. And so I ended up maintaining a somewhat similar pace, but with a much more relaxed kind of mental state. I'm not saying that I'm where I want to be at in sort of my mental journey and my relationship to arcs and my relationship to reviewing and content creating, but I do think that I'm slowly, taking a step in the right direction. And what I'm actually super happy with is that of the 34 books, literally all of them were either written by or featuring a BIPOC character or queer. 74% either featuring BIPOC characters or written by BIPOC authors, and 41% of them queer. So I, made both of my targets for that. And I'm really happy that I was able to read basically in April only books that were either written by featuring characters that were Black, Indigenous, people of color characters or queer characters. Really, there were no reads that were like none of those. There's one read that I wasn't sure about, and that's EXO by Fonda Lee. Just because, Fonda Lee is an Asian writer. I just wasn't sure in the characters, if any of the characters were Asian. I don't know about that. So that's why that was literally the only one that couldn't clearly fall into one of those two categories, but it is written by an Asian author, by Fonda Lee. So I feel pretty good about that anyway. I made this reel on Instagram featuring a lot of different Asian YA releases that I was excited for, and I have either read all of them or am reading them. So, for example, the only one I haven't read yet is Hanny and Ishu's Guide to Fake Dating, but I'm reading that right now. But I've read all of them, the rest of them, and so many of them were in my 5-star categories that I will now share them for you in my 5-star favorite book mentions category now. So, the first one I want to talk about is the first one I just finished, and that's You've Reached Sam. That does not come out until November. I was buddy reading this with Camilla. I totally was a bad buddy reader and just finished it because I just had to, essentially. So that one's the freshest in my mind because I just finished it yesterday. So I'm riding that emotional kind of roller coaster now. And You Reached Sam was just, It was so emotional. It's about grief, it's about love, it's about loss, and it's also about trying to figure out how to say goodbye and realizing that we never want to say goodbye, and there's never these moments that feel like we can. But it was just so just emotional and tender and heartbreaking, and I kind of figured it was going to be before I even read it. So the fact that it just kind of confirms my intense love, I feel really good about that. And I think you should definitely pre-order that one because it was fantastic. The next one is from Little Tokyo with Love. I kind of figured that since I loved I Love You So Mochi so much, that I would really love from Little Tokyo with Love. And the answer is yes. So actually, I read from Little Tokyo with Love and Tokyo Ever After pretty much within the same week. I feel like I had a contemporary reading span where I just read so many different contemporaries back to back to back. So I had to kind of space it out a little bit, like Tokyo Ever After with From Little Tokyo with Love. But both of them kind of deal with this lost princess-esque vibe. Why I love From Little Tokyo with Love the most, I think, is because of the representation of the main character. I think so often we can think of anger and rage as kind of negative emotions, and they're just not. And so much of From Little Tokyo with Love is wrapped up in like anger and rage, and emotionally those two as kind of a cultural thing, and how those kind of extreme emotions are viewed culturally. But also I think so much of it also ties to kind of a femininity vibe as well, especially since the main character From Little Tokyo with Love is an Asian American as well. And so I felt like I've been searching for a book that kind of perfectly encapsulates how I feel about it, because I feel that we don't talk enough about how rage can be such a useful and powerful emotion, and a powerful emotion for good, to recognize the wrong that we see in the world, or to fight for people we love, to protect people we love, and protect our community. And so I just felt like this particular aspect of From Little Tokyo with Love ended up resonating so hard with me, because I feel like I can be very hot-headed as a person. And so for me, the main character and I, we just kind of meshed in a way that I really enjoyed. And so that just made the book feel even more personal to me. And then, of course, there was so many different layers to the plot of romance and mother and daughter relationships and family and belonging, like all of those different things. And so it kind of just wrapped up into being one of those perfect storm books. And so I'm just so happy to know that I really loved I Love You So Much and From Little Tokyo with Love. The next one is Luck of the Titanic by Stacey Lee. Stacey Lee is an auto-buy author, and I knew I was gonna love Luck of the Titanic before I even started it. I always have a kind of a fascination with the Titanic, and just being able to see Stacey Lee kind of bring her very unique historical fiction expertise and lens to the Titanic setting was fantastic. And also, I think it's very palpable, the tension and the suspense you can feel from the beginning, because I mean, we all know about the Titanic for a reason. So Stacey Lee's able to balance the storylines of the main characters and their lives and their ambitions and dreams, also against this timeline of suspense, right? So it kind of counts down the days, and so the suspense within readers only gets higher and higher as we hear these kind of heartbreaking stories about all these things people want to do, dreams, ambitions, and hopes, and then also just to realize that like it's not gonna go well for them at the end. So that was an added layer to the Stacey Lee historical fiction that I love, but also just the characters with this just were so fantastic, and Stacey Lee, is able to balance a story and not make it also about like the Titanic story, if that makes a lot of sense, right? I didn't feel like both of these storylines were kind of one over the other. I felt like both of them were balanced really well. The next one has to be Counting Down with You. This was just so cute, but it was also so deep. I think I was expecting to love Counting Down with You, just like I was expecting to love basically all of the books that I ended up loving. But I was expecting to love it, and I don't think I was expecting it to go so deep for my feelings, like so going for the kill essentially. But what I loved about it was not only the characters, but I loved that it talks about second chances and second opinions, and how important it is to kind of see people without the lens of kind of misconceptions that we have, and to realize that there's so many kind of levels beneath the surface. And I thought the main character's journey about dealing with her parents and talking to her parents and her own dreams and her ambitions and all of those things, like they just felt so tender and emotional. And I don't want to use the word heartbreaking because it's also a story about survival, and it's a story about perseverance and bravery and courage and all of these different things. But just, it felt like a perfectly balanced book in the sense that the highs and lows were so well established, where there'd be moments of where I would almost feel like I need to cry, and then moments where I was just having so much fun and laughing at the characters and the character banter especially. So I mean, it was just one of those books that delivers all of these emotional needs that you might want from a book, essentially. The next one is Lucky Girl. Was so excited for Lucky Girl ever since I hosted the cover reveal for Lucky Girl, and I just ended up really loving it. I didn't realize, I saw on Goodreads that it was a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be, but what I loved about Lucky Girl was that it was so quick paced, but it never felt rushed. It felt like it was taking its time, that we were settling in, getting to know the characters, but it never felt like too many things were happening or that too many things were hastily wrapped up. The pacing of it felt so good. And it was one of those reads that just feels good the entire time. Even though the main character is going through a lot, right? There's all these stories about the ways that money can corrupt you and corrupt your relationships, and what should you do about the money, and like her ex-boyfriend essentially, so all of those different things. But also at the end of the day, the narration style and the pacing and all the characters just made it feel like such a rewarding and satisfying experience to read. Like there was never any time where I would come away from a reading session where I think, oh, I'm not really into it, or I'm not sure where this goes. Like the pacing just was able to hook you and pick you right back up where you left off. And the final YA pick I have is Hurricane Summer. I was not prepared for how intense Hurricane Summer was going to be, so please definitely check out the trigger warnings before you read Hurricane Summer. But it was so intensely emotional. It was an intense emotional story about a journey and about how this girl's behaviors and sexuality and desires are kind of twisted against her in this culture that she comes into, and her complicated relationship with her dad, and seeing her privilege, and also like the envy and the hurt and the lack of privilege, I guess, around her. All of these different layers kind of swirled into this kind of intense emotional storm, I guess. And storm is a great word for it because, I mean, it's called Hurricane Summer and there is a hurricane in the book. And so it was just such a beautifully raw story about heartbreak and about growth and about pain and about family and growing pains in general, and realizing that, the path of the hurricane, it's not necessarily about all the damage it does. That the story doesn't end when the hurricane has gone, right? The hurricane has come and kind of irrevocably changed the landscape and changed who you are as a person. And so Hurricane Summer is just about that transformation process. And yeah, it was, just, as I was saying earlier, beautifully raw. And it was very intense, but it definitely felt worthwhile to me because at the end, I just felt like the growth of the character was just so important and was so satisfying to see. But I definitely wouldn't go into Hurricane Summer thinking that, oh, it's going to be, a fun, carefree vacation to see her family, right? It's not that at all. But I think that if you can handle the trigger warnings and you're in the mood for something that is deep and introspective and kind of painful at times, then you will really enjoy Hurricane Summer. The first one is romance, and it's happy endings. And I did not know what to expect going into this book, and I ended up loving it so much. It's sex positive, the banter, and the kind of second chance romance. Like, now that I've read it, I want to read a ton more second chance romance books. So if you know any, please leave them down below. But I loved the characters. The characters were dual perspectives, so we were allowed to see as readers both of their perspectives. But just, yeah, the second chance love, kind of second chance romance thing just swept me off my feet, essentially. And I ended up loving it and having to talk about how do we emotionally open up to people, and how are we vulnerable and love again and love and kind of all of these different things. And it was super steamy and it was just so good. It's something that once I finished reading, I immediately wanted to jump back in and read it again. And the final one should be no surprise. It's The Dragon of Ginseng, and it's the third of the Bitch Queen books. And I loved it. The third one was one that it just took me by storm, essentially. I loved it so much. It was like easily 5 stars before I even ended, and then that ending was just so good. It's just been so great to be on the journey of all of these different characters, and especially in the third one. The third one looks so much about legacy and so much about our family and reputation and their expectations. So, should we let our families, or in this case, her dad's expectations, kind of make us see ourselves a certain way? And should we let their legacy kind of taint what we want to do for the future, or the traditions and everything? And also, I think that the series as a whole has done a great job of looking at um, the role as mother, as queen, as daughter, as woman, as all of these different things. And I just felt like that theme specifically of looking at those kinds of shifting hats and perspectives and personalities that we have to wear was perfectly wrapped up and discussed in the end in a way that felt almost a little bit painful, but in like a growing pain kind of way. And I just felt that it came together so beautifully at the end. And it kind of just reinforced my love for this series. And I feel like if you loved the first one, if you liked the second one, like, you definitely have to read it. And I feel like with third books, I feel that recommending it is kind of like, well, if you've gotten through 1 and 2, you're probably just going to read 3 anyway. But I would definitely say that number 3 reignited my love for the entire series as a whole. And so you should definitely, if you haven't read it, just pick up the first one. So that is the end of my April wrap up. I hope you enjoyed and that you saw some reviews maybe of the books that you're looking forward to in May, or even, later than May. And I will see you for the May wrap up when that happens. Bye.